Good afternoon. I'm Jane Adams, member of the communications team of the SIMalliance, or to give it its full name, Security, Identity, Mobility Alliance. I'm here today to introduce this webinar on 5G security. Over the last year, SIMalliance has been working extensively on scoping and defining security recommendations for 5G. This webinar, presented by Paul Bradley, Chair of the 5G Working Group at SIMalliance, will describe our analysis of 5G use cases, their security requirements they produce, and suggested approaches for preventing attacks. But first of all, I'll start with a few words about who SIMalliance is. SIMalliance members represent approximately 88% of the global SIM market and deliver the most widely distributed secure application delivery platform in the world. The slide you're looking at now shows our members and our strategic partners. SIMalliance promotes the essential role of a dedicated tamper-resistant hardware module in delivering secure mobile applications and services across all devices that can access wireless networks. It identifies and addresses related technical issues and clarifies and recommends existing technical standards relevant to the implementation of hardware security. It aims to facilitate and accelerate delivery of secure mobile applications globally, and it monitors the market and produces market data reports. This year, SIMalliance formed a 5G working group to examine, with an open mind, future security requirements for 5G across a range of segments, which are massive IoT, critical communications, enhanced mobile broadband, and V2X. Earlier this year, the working group released a marketing white paper on this topic. It's now about to launch an in-depth technical paper discussing security requirements and how to meet them. This presentation provides you with an introduction to the contents of the paper. Now I'll hand over to Paul.
Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening to everybody. So, first of all, what is 5G? 5G is a network of networks designed to provide ubiquitous connectivity. It's a network that's designed around use cases. But today, it's the set of technical standards in the early stages of development that are expected to replace 3G eventually, and it will encompass 4G networks from 2018 onwards, as well as some other networks as well. 5G networks will provide lower latency, greater reliability, greater throughput, higher connectivity density, better coverage, and higher mobility range. Some use cases for 5G will target sub 1 millisecond latency and more than 10 gigabits per second download speed. These features will be provided by different network layers, leading to the need to provide security, privacy, confidentiality, data integrity, trust, and identity within a highly diverse technical and functional environment. The most important segments identified for 5G are massive IoT, V2X, critical communications, and enhanced mobile broadband. Underlying all of these is network operations. So let's talk about some of the characteristics of a 5G future. 5G technology is expected to be built around a network of networks model, encompassing LTE, Wi-Fi, low-powered wide area technologies. Real-time handover between network technologies involved will be key to success for use cases involving mobility. This model is likely to be achieved through network function virtualization combined with network slicing, which I'll explain in a moment. GSMA identifies sub 1 millisecond latency as a requirement for 5G. Greater reliability, greater throughput, higher connection density, better coverage, and higher mobility range are also needed, but must not be at the expense of security. 5G also has the potential to broaden the range of attractive attack targets identifiable by threat actors. Security methods applied to 4G and below will have to be extended to meet the requirements of 5G, and not just match but exceed the high levels of security and trust enjoyed by previous generations. So, security and privacy remain fundamental requirements. However, the technical demands posed by 5G are higher than those of previous generations. In addition, computing power is increased all the time, increasing the ability of attackers to launch effective attacks. This slide shows how network slicing may work. Network slicing is a mechanism that allows 5G to meet its diversity of requirements. For example, flexibility and quality of service, by enabling operators to support multiple virtual networks while benefiting from economies of scale that come from large-scale physical network aspects. It allows operators to customize autonomous and independent networks to best meet the requirements of different market scenarios. Network slices will be optimized on a per use case basis for data rate, latency, power efficiency, and connections. Network slicing provides the flexibility and economies of scale operators need while allowing them to meet the competing requirements of different vertical sectors. Network slices are intended to be independent and autonomous, which seems to apply security policies and configurations that differ according to functional needs of the slice. However, rather than being a logical entity, a slice is a logical mapping of a set of functions. Some of those functions will be shared between slices. Therefore, you cannot simply apply a security policy to a slice. Instead, what's really important is the access control, authorization, and authentication between individual virtualized functions. For example, is this function allowed to talk to that one? Meaning, are they on the same slice? Any subscription is protected by a network authentication application within the device that takes care of network identification, authentication, and encryption. The coming of 5G will greatly increase the attack surface and bring a wide range of different threats. These include, but are not limited to, data manipulation, unprotected endpoint entry, equipment cloning, rogue devices, denial of service, eavesdropping, man-in-the-middle attacks, impersonation attacks or spoofing, vehicle jacking, device theft, vehicle or device tracking, piracy of premium content, terrorist attacks, or bidding down attacks. Most of these attacks are applicable to all 5G segments to varying degrees. We'll later review some of the security requirements we see arising from these threats across the different segments. But first, in order to guarantee security in a 5G future, it's important to consider it at all levels from the network to the user. This very detailed diagram shows the 5 layers at which SIMalliance has considered security requirements within 5G and the detail to which SIMalliance went in our analysis. These layers are network, service, application, device, and consumer. The network layer is split into network access, which is part of the control plane, and the application layer relating to the user plane. The network layer covers security features that make sure that only authorized and authenticated subscribers are allowed to gain access across network functions. The application layer covers security features such as integrity protection and encryption of data that is transferred over the radio interface. The service layer covers aspects such as service authentication, confidentiality, integrity protection, and privacy. Those mechanisms may either be based on features provided by the network layer or may be completely independent of them. At the application layer, applications may implement additional and/or different security mechanisms. These could cover security mechanisms such as end-to-end data encryption and integrity protection. The device layer covers security mechanisms to make sure only authorized users have access to device resources and in order to make sure that assets such as the device identifier cannot be manipulated. Finally, the consumer layer covers privacy and consumer identification and authentication of the consumer towards other 5G system components such as the device. One of the most important segments identified for 5G is massive IoT. The massive IoT segment is extremely broad, covering not just machine-to-machine, but consumer-based services too. It is likely to consist of an ecosystem of billions of potentially very low-cost devices, such as sensors or trackers. Typical use cases are highly varied and may include home appliances, some wearables, and machine-type communications including metering, sensors, and alarms. Clearly, this is a very broad and diverse range of use cases, and as such, operational and hence security requirements will vary. However, SIMalliance members recognize that this combination of massive IoT and 5G will pose a range of security challenges and requirements. These changes will present some similar and some very different, but at least as great security challenges compared to those present in IoT and machine-to-machine communications today. Demands may range in IoT from those posed by low-level sensors to those of high-end use cases like home automation. For example, communications will either be long-range, low power, low bandwidth, and then infrequent or focused on speed. Needs will differ around how frequently communication occurs, the amount of data to be managed and communicated, the speed and latency, and around how frequent authentication has to be. So what sorts of threats are we talking about? In use cases such as smart metering, the data transferred needs to be protected against eavesdropping and manipulation. As compared to voice communications, data can be more easily attacked and modified. The value comes from the integrity of the data, so integrity protection is important. In particular, mechanisms previously developed in 3G and 4G to primarily protect voice need to be enhanced. Because these devices are connected to the network, if they lack adequate security, they offer the possibility of being used as an entry point to the network for attackers. That might just be your home network, but it might also be the wider network. It's in everybody's interest to secure endpoints. There's also a risk of equipment cloning, leading to potential massive attacks to overload the network, leading to denial of service attacks. This is just a small sample of possible attacks. If we consider attacks specific to consumer IoT, we must remember that personal data may be at stake. There are also significant privacy risks. In recent years, we've heard all about homeowners being spied on via smart devices or through baby monitors. We shouldn't carry that threat forward into a 5G world. In addition, we've already seen unsecured devices offer attackers an easy endpoint into the network, irrespective of the device type, allowing a range of threats that affect more than just the homeowner. This is not an area where device manufacturers and service providers should economize on security. In industrial IoT, eavesdropping is more likely to be a means to an end, a gateway into opening up industrial IoT systems to a wide range of threats. Attackers could take the industrial system down with a denial of service attack. They could demand a ransom to unlock it. They could cause chaos by manipulating data and message formats. They could use unprotected endpoints for entry into corporate networks to carry out industrial espionage or economically damage a competitor. Again, security at all levels is a must. Security methods currently applied to today's 4G and previous generations will have to be extended both to meet the performance and power efficiency requirements and lifespan of a 5G IoT world. As a result, SIMalliance sees a range of potential security requirements in 5G IoT, including identifying the device, user, network, application, service, and service platform, the ability to operate within low power requirements and to manage security during hibernation states, data authenticity, confidentiality, and integrity for low complexity, low throughput services and sensors that may nonetheless be highly vulnerable, maintaining customer identity, location, and privacy, and lastly, data verifiability. Now, some detail about meeting those high-level requirements. Irrespective of the connection use case, in order to record all types of credentials, be they for 3GPP radio access or non-3GPP radio access, the IoT device should own a secure repository. To manage these credentials, the IoT device's secure repository must support a secure means to load, delete, and activate from the repository in which profiles are stored to the device into which they are being downloaded. Service layer security requires authentication functions, meaning signing and verifying signatures, and confidentiality functions such as encryption, decryption, and lastly key management. At the application layer, a secure service must be embedded as a separate data protection function, independent of any relationship with the network. This service will secure data according to the level of security required, meaning cipher and/or signature, and will be based on symmetric or asymmetric keys according to the IoT device use case and network bandwidth. Given the arguments advanced by ETSI in its Quantum Safe white paper and how symmetric algorithms using longer key lengths will better stand the test of time, SIMalliance recommends this as an approach. Low power consumption may be a critical requirement in some areas of massive IoT, irrespective of the connection type. A hibernate state must be supported, and this has security implications. Session data must either, 1, be persistent but securely stored during hibernation, or secondly, to avoid new session data and authentication being required, modifying the re-authentication policy may be an answer, so that you authenticate the device less. New efficient algorithms and key generation processes may be needed. One particularly important point in securing IoT is provisioning. Managing initial network connectivity securely will require secure provisioning of unique user identities for both network and service level access, network and service authentication credentials, and communication cryptographic keys as well as application identifiers. This may include payment credentials in use cases where the IoT device needs the ability to make proximity or remote payments. The content of the securely provisioned data will likely depend on the device's location, as well as agreements between integrators, service providers, and mobile network operators. Any approach must also be able to manage the requirement for a device to work out of the box with zero configuration and without the need for a pre-installed 3GPP subscription. So the means of making this initial connection must be assured, and the technology used to protect the download of the network authentication application must be defined. This poses a particular challenge for devices without user interfaces. Another important segment identified for 5G is critical communications. Critical communications covers drones and their control, cloud-driven virtual reality, smart multi-node factories, cloud-driven robots, public safety, and e-health. Data is likely to include geolocation data, instructions to elements in cloud-based interactions, and medical, operational, and situational data. Some of this data will be highly sensitive and will be communicated much more frequently than in segments like IoT. Threats may include man-in-the-middle attacks, eavesdropping, denial of service, and rogue devices. There is a risk that security may be sacrificed for speed. Further sector characteristics and functional requirements include reliability. This covers the certainty that data is received and decoded correctly within a given time frame. Availability is closely related to reliability and covers equipment uptime, network capacity, and coverage. Throughput, the amount of data that can be moved through the network in a given amount of time. Ultra-low latency, the amount of delay on the network between input and output. Some areas of critical communications will require sub 1 millisecond latency. Security performance, meaning appropriate security for the use case in question, given differing requirements around latency, data quantity, and frequency, and other factors. This may mean that activities such as identification, authentication, encryption, and integrity checks take place either on the mobile edge or at the core of the Cloud RAN. And lastly, data integrity and confidentiality. Where human lives are concerned, protecting data and preventing any type of manipulation is vital. In critical communications, public lives are at risk, and hence security of the network authentication application cannot be compromised. As a result, SIMalliance sees potential security requirements in critical communications falling into two main areas. Firstly, optimized security for reliability and best throughput. This includes confidentiality for device identifiers, such as the IMEI or its 5G equivalent. These need to be integrity protected when being stored and transmitted, or anonymized if confidentiality cannot be set up. Subscriber identity confidentiality also needs to be suitably protected. Additionally, trust in all cooperating nodes will be required. This trust can come from a tamper-resistant secure element endorsed, qualified, and controlled by the connectivity provider, i.e. the operator. To combat threats of passive attacks, mainly in the case of subscriber key compromise, provision of forward secrecy is to be considered for enhanced communication confidentiality. The second category is fast security for ultra-low latency. Low end-to-end latency, including the latency of initiating communications, will be an important shaping factor for security design, with any solutions having to focus on speed as well as effectiveness. Some use cases, for example, in temporary public emergency networks, require ultra-low latency. This requirement could impact the overall security, in particular related to authentication procedures and end-to-end or hop-by-hop encryption. Reauthentication happens in today's network after a specified timeout period or a certain number of events such as calls, SMSs, or data connections. Going forward, the reauthentication policy should evolve to not delay any communications on the user plane of the network during critical communications. Another central challenge faced by critical communication systems is the maximal rates of transmission of secured messages, as well as their maximal key generation rates of secured keys and rates of transmission of secured keys. Enhanced mobile broadband encompasses the connectivity of tablets, mobile phones, and other portable devices. It offers a range of very diverse scenarios with indoor and outdoor use, fast-moving versus slow-moving devices, use on trains and planes, hotspots such as offices, crowds and high-density areas, low-density areas, and varying levels of network capacity requirement depending on time or other factors. It's likely to be one of the first 5G segments to take off. The major requirements for managing connectivity will be convenience and instant access to high bandwidth services, so again there is a risk that security may be sacrificed for speed. Breaches may occur at both a service level, for example, gaining a user's account credentials to log into a service, or at a network access level, for example, gaining a user's network connectivity credentials or piggybacking on a user's connection without them knowing. Threats are likely to be similar to those for critical communications. Security requirements in enhanced mobile broadband will closely echo those of network operations, as well as having factors in common with other segments, so there's no need to go into repetitive detail here. V2X covers vehicle-to-vehicle, vehicle-to-infrastructure, and vehicle-to-anything communications. It combines elements of enhanced mobile broadband, critical communications, in particular the latter's requirement for ultra-low latency. Once again, data is likely to include geolocation data and instructions to elements in cloud-based interactions, as well as user data, usage data for infotainment, and even premium content data. Use cases include autonomous driving, teleoperated driving, infotainment, vehicle management, and diagnosis. Threats may include attacks against the vehicle, as well as misusing the vehicle itself as a threat agent against other vehicles or pedestrians. Once again, this is a segment where human lives are potentially at risk. The main requirements are user authentication, authenticity of data, integrity of data, confidentiality, and user privacy. Network coverage will be critical in many use cases in this segment, for the vehicle must be always aware of its environment and should be able to interact at all times with it. Specific requirements will therefore include the ability to operate without network coverage through non-3GPP means such as proximity services for device-to-device communications. Without coverage, the vehicle must still be able to receive and send information to other vehicles and pedestrians. As the vehicles in any one scenario are unlikely to be all using the same network, Lack of coverage for one network may lead to one vehicle with coverage acting as a relay device for another with none. In all cases, ultra-low latency is critical, as a few milliseconds delay could lead to a collision or a death. Mutual authentication is also critical to be certain that the data comes from the right or the authorized entity and that it should be acted on. Low latency requirements extend to authentication to the network too. Another big issue in V2X is user privacy, which is crucial to avoid tracking and the sharing of location and driving behaviors with unauthorized parties. Overall, sector requirements closely echo many from enhanced mobile broadband and critical communications. For example, the need to maintain communications while traveling at speed and consistent availability. The sectors even overlap. For example, autonomous vehicles must be able to move out of the way of emergency vehicles. Now let's look at all these factors and how they add up to a coherent set of security requirements in 5G. Let's start with IoT. In IoT, low-cost simple devices may form endpoints for systems carrying high-value data. It makes no sense to economize on endpoint security when the risk is not purely to the endpoint. Overall, the value of the data and the risk to the system as a whole must be considered. Simpler devices often require higher security, not lower. In addition, they may have lifespans of as long as 15 years. Their security must last that long too. A remotely updatable security solution is a must. Economizing on security now may prove to be a false economy in the future. If we turn to enhanced mobile broadband, requirements and solutions will closely match those discussed earlier for network security. The entity storing the network authentication applications, such as the secure tamper-resistant entity, must be capable of being, and should be, audited and certified by a third party and functionally tested against a suitable industry-agreed functional compliance suite. There must be a secure process which could be proprietary to the MNO to prevent one user from taking over the phone number, meaning the MSISDN, of another user without their consent. In both of these segments, security must be appropriate to the value of the data and the nature of the use case, and as a result, the service provider will choose the mechanism most suitable to their needs. Now, on to critical communications and V2X. In critical communications, this segment requires the highest level of security protection. Both the subscriber identity and the device identifier must be securely and separately stored and integrity protected, both in storage and transmission. Both also need to be protected against malware or unauthorized applications when being transmitted over the network and when being stored. It's also very important to decouple the authentication on the control plane from the encryption on the user plane. That implies that there should be no critical path present on the user plane. Furthermore, the authentication mechanism on the control plane must not impact the latency for critical communications taking place on the user plane. In V2X, the best solution to meet this segment's requirement for a highly robust level of security is secure tamper-resistant hardware. Given the ultra-low latency requirements, high-speed tamper-resistant hardware with advanced crypto processing capabilities are required. A range of security grades may be required. For example, police, military, and government vehicles may be seen to require higher levels of protection. This can be done at the application layer, beyond network connectivity layers. Additionally, higher priority vehicle communications may be managed on a separate slice. Any black box device must be capable of storing information securely and maintaining its integrity to avoid insurance fraud. Once again, secure tamper-resistant hardware will provide the best approach. In both these segments, human lives are at stake and security is of the highest importance. For this reason, we do urge the use of secure tamper-resistant storage, the EUICC. So after analyzing all of these requirements, here are our key recommendations for 5G as a whole. Managing identities on the network will require identification of the application and corresponding application provider. It will also need secure storage of the unique identity on the device. Mutual authentication of the device and network will also be necessary. It has been mandatory since 3G, as may mutual authentication for applications back to their service platforms. Appropriate certification and qualification will be an important prerequisite in many use cases for those providing such devices. For example, Germany already requires smart meter certification. This is hard to achieve with software-only security. New efficient algorithms, authentication policies and protocols that take into account lower power consumption should be evaluated for the IoT space for devices extremely limited in resources, such as low power sensors transmitting machine data at infrequent intervals. SIMalliance also proposes the use of longer symmetric keys in preference to asymmetric approaches, particularly in view of the projected lengthy lifespan of many IoT devices. This aligns with the recommendations made in ETSI's Quantum Safe Cryptography and Security White Paper. Indeed, any technology recommended for use in this sector should have a 15-year lifespan. As part of the work that was undertaken by the 5G Working Group, we carried out a comparison exercise between the EU-ICC, Trusted Execution Environment, and SoftSIM. In line with our findings that security requirements vary by use case and the nature of the data exchanged, these different approaches may suit different situations and each has their own pros and cons. The SIMalliance urges that the value of the data must be considered, not just the device bill of materials when it comes to choosing a security solution. Several security solutions are available, of which the EU-ICC is the most secure and best in class, and thus ideal for cases of a critical nature. There are several reasons for this. It's based on a mature solution, the EU-ICC itself. It's suitable for all use cases. It provides security over the lifespan of the device. It removes logistics costs of physical SIM distribution for MNOs. And in addition, it's an isolated certifiable piece of hardware via a protection profile. It provides virtual machine interoperability at bytecode level, which allows operators to download the same app to any EU-ICC. Without a doubt, it's the securest approach available today. But in conclusion, we recommend that each use case is considered in light of the value of the data involved, as a means of making a decision about the best type of security to use. If you'd like to find out more about this, please download our white paper, 5G Security, Making the Right Choice to Match Your Needs. It's available from the SIMalliance website as of tomorrow. So, thank you. Our key conclusion is that security should be built into 5G from the outset to meet the requirements of the massive IoT segment and others such as critical communications, enhanced mobile broadband, V2X and network operations, which underlie everything. Why is it vital to build in security into 5G from the outset? Well, because what's not built in from the beginning cannot easily be added on later. That is why SIMalliance is engaged. Tomorrow we launch our technical white paper, which provides further information and analysis around these themes discussed in this webinar. And please visit our website, www.simalliance.org, to download it.
Thank you, Paul. We're going to be shutting the webinar sharply at 1:45, but before then we have a few minutes to take questions. And over the course of the webinar, a number of questions have in fact been submitted, which Paul will answer. If you have any questions, please use the panel on your right to submit them. And any questions that we can't get to now before 1:45, we will of course answer by email over the next day or two. So the first question I'm seeing here is, which 5G market segment do you expect to take off first, and what are the security implications of that?
Thank you, Jane. That's a very good question. So to me it seems that very likely that it will be the enhanced mobile broadband segment. Maybe we've also seen speculated speculation around fiber to the home use cases. So from a security perspective, enhanced mobile broadband, as we've seen, closely echoes the requirements of network operations, while sharing a few characteristics of other segments like critical communications, such as low latency. So there's one major additional requirement that we need to think about in this segment, which is the transfer of the MSISDN, so the user's phone number, which identifies the subscription to the network, and it's the identifier of the user. And in the smartphone segment, this needs to be able to be transferred from one device to another. So, for example, if I have a removable UICC today and I'm transferring to a smartphone, a 5G smartphone, I need to be able to transfer my phone number and firstly prove that that phone number that is being transferred from device A to device B is truly mine. So this process needs to be secure so that one user cannot take over the MSISDN of another user without their consent.
Thanks, Paul. You mentioned privacy just now, and in fact one of the questions we have received is on that very topic. So can you give us a bit more detail about privacy in the context of 5G?
So yeah, so clearly it's going to be a key consideration in 5G, and it has to be respected due to regulation and national privacy protection frameworks. Segments where it's particularly important include massive IoT, enhanced mobile broadband, and V2X. In terms of the layer model we presented earlier, privacy is a consideration at all layers, particularly the consumer layer and the network layer. So just to give you an example of privacy, it's very important that data cannot be linked to a given user. If we look at the massive IoT segment, for example, if a thief is managing to link data to a particular smart home appliance, the thief may be able to determine whether that user is present or not in their home and be able to decide which home to rob as such. So to enforce privacy, temporary subscriber identifiers are needed, as are separate independent keys for encryption and integrity protection. Keys for the different security layers should be independent of each other. It must also be possible to securely store both the device identifier and the network authentication applications separately from each other. We also speak a lot about things like the usage of big data, and of course in the big data space we need to make sure that that data is anonymized in the right way and handled and treated in the right way.
Okay, thanks, Paul. And one more, is the cloud going to play a key part in 5G, and how does that impact security?
Oh, that's a very good question, Jane. Today's mobile network elements and functions and components of a network are based upon a specialized hardware architecture at the core, which is provided by incumbent network vendors with purpose-selected software they've developed on top of that hardware. Tomorrow, the hardware will become generic and functionality will move over to software. Either that could be open source software or from those existing incumbent vendors. And all of that becomes kind of a virtualized environment for running this 5G network. That in itself requires some significant security evolution, and it raises some significant alarms around security. Another thing which we expect to be a major factor is the use of mobile edge computing, which will clearly increase the attack surface, thus raising further security concerns and the need for security enhancement. While authentication should take place at the centralized or cloud RAN where possible, in some scenarios, for example, critical communications, it may take place at the mobile edge. This is relatively straightforward for stationary devices, but for mobile devices, the location must pre-calculated authentication vectors to be available locally at the mobile edge in the time frame required. However, voice and data encryption could be distributed to mobile edge clouds in case of latency requirements where both parties communicating are connected through the same mobile edge cloud. Keys corresponding to those provisioned in the network authentication application, as well as any appropriate network master keys or configuration parameters, should always be securely stored on the network side using a physical computing device that safeguards and manages digital keys. For example, a tamper-resistant entity within the network.
Okay, looking at the clock, I would say that we've got time for just one further question. So, Paul, what is the role of the SIM in the various low-power wide area networks, both cellular and non-cellular in this case? Does the SIM actually feature in all of those roadmaps?
So with regards to cellular networks, so firstly, cellular networks which operate licensed spectrum, for sure, as of today, there is a SIM in all of those licensed network implementations. With regards to unlicensed network applications, the SIM is an option, and it's up to the providers of those low-powered wide area networks to work with the service providers to find a security framework which both players feel comfortable with.
Great. Thanks, Paul. I think that's probably all we've got time for today. So thank you very much for presenting the webinar, Paul. And as we said earlier, any questions that we haven't been able to answer today, and I can see there are a few, we will reply to by email by the end of the week. So thank you very much to everyone who attended, and have a great rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.